and we're ready to go. So thank you very much for being punctual. Thank you for being here. I mean, what else are you going to do at the moment, right? Because you've probably been on the 5 local walks that you can do a million times over the last year, and you're thoroughly bored of them. And the nights are drawing in anyway. So, I mean, what else can you do at the evening? You've probably completed Netflix and you've completed Amazon Prime. And so doing a webinar right now is probably actually quite a relief for you from the day-to-day sort of routine that you've got into with lockdowns and out of lockdowns and back into different tiering systems and all of that kind of stuff. But appreciate it. Thank you for letting me have a chat with you this evening. This is from Source Franchise. My name is Chris Kirkwood, and I am the director of Source Franchise. So without further ado, let's get on with it. And the thing that I'd like to start off with is, why am I the right person to be in your ears tonight? Why am I qualified to talk to you? Well, I'm the franchise director, like I said. I founded, run and grown multiple businesses in property, outside of property, and different business sectors. I've been involved in property for over 10 years now. The smallest deal that I ever did in property, this is the smallest deal that I bought. I've sold a deal that's cheaper than this, but this is the smallest deal that I bought. It was 55,000. And I'm involved in deals that are worth up to a GDV of 150 million. Done lots of things in between that, and also done rent-to-rent stuff and sort of create much more creative strategies than just simply buying and refurbing or buying and building and that kind of stuff. So I've been involved in property for a long time, and I've got a wealth of experience of doing different deals myself. And that was to execute my own portfolio. But now what I do is I help the Sourced franchisees. I help them, I assist them in identifying ways to create money out of property. So we had a great example today where one of my support team had a deal that came to them from a franchisee, and we were looking at the deal. The franchisee had put it across to us, and it worked, but it wasn't setting the world on fire. So what we did was we restructured that deal. We came up with a different way of looking at that property and of executing that deal. And all of a sudden, we'd raised the GDV, we'd created a huge increase on the margin, and then send that back to the franchisee to tell them that, you know, this is how you should be looking at this property deal. So the franchisee's gone out there, they found the deal, they've sent it to us, and we've used that to show them how they can make more money. But also what that process does is it educates the franchisee as how they should be looking at these kind of deals, and not just in the way that they'd currently been looking at it. So that's me, and I am part of Sourced. I am still, I think, the only member of Sourced that is actually on the front page of the website. That's me on the right-hand side in the green box. Everything else is images that we've taken or bought, and that's me on the right-hand side. So I don't think I've actually told anybody that works here yet, but I might keep that to myself, because if I told them, I'm sure they'd take me down straight away. So the Sourced success so far. What's the journey of Sourced? Why are we here? You know, how come you've come to us, and why are we the right people to listen to? Well, Sourced was launched in 2017 when we launched a pilot scheme. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to build a franchise model. And we thought that the building a franchise model in the property space was the right thing to do, because, you know, property training has been around for many, many years. And the thing that we'd noticed from property training was that, you know, you'd go for a weekend somewhere, you'd spend some time with a trainer, they'd talk at you for 2 days, and then they would, you know, open the door and you'd be gone from their life forever. You know, if you chose to go back on some other training, then, you know, that was completely your choice. But actually executing the information that they'd given you was completely over to you. And we got some stats on you know, the number of people that had gone to training courses and actually used the information and made progress. And it was frightening. It was frightening how few people actually took the information and implemented it, because it's not about what you know, it's about what you implement. So we decided that, you know, we looked at the franchise and we thought that that was exactly the right way to go in property, because not only are you training people, not only are you giving them the information, but you're also making sure that they implement it. And that's the key. And that's what we think, and that's what we've got evidence as well from the last 3 years, that has worked really well at helping people build their own property business or build their own property portfolio, whatever they're trying to create. So obviously a lot of people jumped onto that and thought that that was a good idea too. And in February 2018, we hit 20 franchisees. So relatively quickly, we got to 20 franchisees. And then we went out to the FCA because we were seeking FCA approval to run our peer-to-peer platform. Alongside running our peer-to-peer platform, the number of franchisees was always growing. We launched Source Capital, which requires the FCA authorization or approval, in November 2018. In February 2019, we launched our £150 million development and our part in that, which is Regent Plaza in Manchester, which is 525 flats. We received approval for ISA and pension funding in March 2019, and that's specifically for investing into our peer-to-peer platform, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a little while. You might not understand what peer-to-peer means, but I'll go through it briefly later. Launched Source Care in September 2019, and we hit 70 franchisees in February 2020. This slide hasn't been updated for a while, I'm ashamed to say, and we're actually at 130 franchisees now, so we nearly doubled since February 2020. And that's because we've hit a niche. We've hit a niche, and we've hit a vein that is pertinent, that makes a difference. And that is the support that we offer people, as well as the training. So what are we specifically going to talk about tonight? This webinar is about 7 ways to make money from property in 2021. And I'm really keen to do this. And actually, I want to use this as an idea for a podcast that we're going to create as well, and some other content, because what inspired me to talk to you this evening about this is seeing what other property companies are doing. And specifically, I'll be honest with you, property trading companies, because I see a lot of property trading companies that are being very vocal at this time of year, telling you about all the things that you should be doing in 2021. And now I love that motivation. You know, it's great. People get very motivated at this time of year because generally people are creating goals and setting themselves targets at this time of year. But when it comes to actually giving you advice, that's something that I think needs a little bit more care and attention. So that's why I wanted to talk to you this evening about 7 ways to make money in 2021, because I see these training companies that are telling you of 1, perhaps 2 ways to make money in 2021. And I'll tell you in a little while why I think that is not particularly relevant for everybody in all situations. So it's January. That's where we are at the moment. And in property, regardless of your situation, regardless of how much money you have, how much money you make, how old you are, what your experience is, there are always ways that you can make money. You know, we have a lot of franchisees from very, very different backgrounds. And we work with them to create ways and create pathways to make money. So it means that anybody can get started. It just needs a bit of care and attention, a bit of nous, a bit of planning, and a bit of objective thinking in order to create that plan for yourself, to understand what your route to your end goal is going to be. Because, you know, you could get 2 people. One person is a young person, no money behind them, got no experience in property, and they might want to be a developer. You know, they might have an absolute yearning to become a property developer and build new build stuff. And you might have somebody else who's been in property for a long time, and they want to, you know, they've got a good pot of money behind them. They're a bit more experienced, but they want to be a developer as well. Now, those 2 people have got 2 very similar goals, but they've got very different routes for how they're going to get there, because they come from very different backgrounds. So that younger person that hasn't got the experience could still become a developer. It's just what you need to do is you need to have the plan, and you need to have a bit of patience behind you to know how you're going to get to the end goal that you are yearning for. So how do you decide, right? So if you're sitting there and maybe you don't have many people that you can talk to about property, you're sitting there, you're trying to decide what you should focus on. How do you make that decision when you're on your own? Well, I'm going to share something with you now that, you know, this is absolutely the truth. When I first started to get into property, more than 10 years ago, probably 12 to 13 years ago now, when I first started to get into property, genuinely, this is true. The first goal that I ever set myself, and this wasn't a year-long goal, this was a much shorter term goal. This was like a monthly goal. The first ever goal that I set myself was to have 2 conversations every single day about property. And that is absolutely true. And I remember calling my mum on a Wednesday night because I'd had 1 conversation about property with somebody already, and I needed to have another conversation. So I picked up the phone and I called my mum because it was like 9 o'clock at night, and I couldn't talk to anybody else. And I had a conversation with my mum about property just to make sure that I hit my goal. And the reason for that was I wanted to increase the number of people that knew that I was in property, and also increase my understanding of property, and just try and become like a sponge and take in as much as I possibly could by having conversations with as many people as possible. But then having those conversations then led my network to understand what I wanted to get into, and what helped me choose what I should focus on as regards to a property strategy. But if you don't have that ability, or you may be a little bit more impatient than I am, then you need to have those conversations. Or how do you make that decision as to what you're going to focus on for the next month, or potentially for the next year? Now, if you listen to these guys that are coming out and talking to you from other property training companies, you might believe, or you might be bought into the hype that there is one hot strategy for you in 2021. Now, the dangerous thing I think with that is that that's not relevant to everybody. So, all right, I put it's a discussion, but I've sort of led you down the route that I think the answer should go. Is there one hot strategy in 2021, and is it right for you? Well, you can break that question down into two separate parts. Is there a hot strategy in 2021? Yeah, there probably is. There probably will be. Is it right for you is a more pertinent question, because whether it's right for you or not can be the make or break of your business, your portfolio, and potentially your financial situation as you know it. So we need to look into that in a bit more detail. Whoops. So is there one perfect property strategy? Well, from their point of view, from these training companies' point of view, does telling everyone benefit you, or does it benefit them? What's their intention? In most cases, their intention is to put bums on seats and to sell courses. So it's easier for them if they're telling you that there is one property strategy that you need to focus on. Now, our structure is different. Like I say, our structure is to help you in a much more bespoke way. So we have a number of support people. We have a support team, and these support team look after a set number of franchisees. And what they'll do, and what they've been doing for the last, since the beginning of December, really, is having a conversation with each of their franchisees about what they're trying to achieve in 2021, and coming up with a plan to help them understand how they're going to get there, how they're going to achieve what they want to, how they're going to hit their goals in 2021. And we're very selective about the people that we bring on as franchisees as well, because we have a lot of people that apply to join with us, but our focus is on quality and not just the quantity. So what should you look at, and what do you need to take into consideration when you're making that decision as to what you focus on for 2021? There are a number of things, so let's look at them right now. First of all, you've got market conditions, and you've got lending conditions, your personal situation, your financial situation, which are broken out because they are different. Your personal situation might be how much time you have to put into property, and your financial situation is obviously not only if you've got a pot of money that's ready to invest into property, but also how much more money you're able to bring to the table over the next year. Experience in property is obviously very important, and also your purpose. Your purpose is one that I think a lot of people miss out. But it is probably the most relevant out of all of them, because most of the other ones you can work around, but I think purpose is something that is very difficult to work around, because it can instantly lead to demotivation and a lack of effort going into achieving your goals. So what I mean by purpose is you could be in a job that's paying you fantastically well, and you might have a decent amount of time that job allows you, a decent amount of free time, in order to put that free time into property and building your property business. But if your purpose is to get out of that job and go into property full time, then that's completely different from somebody who would be in the same situation but just wants to build a portfolio. So your purpose is where you want to get to in all of the previous conditions, in all of the previous situations that we've listed above. So the market conditions, something that you need to take into consideration. Obviously, at the moment, and certainly for the last 6 months of last year, the property market has been very, very, very buoyant. Every estate agent I talk to is absolutely rushed off their feet because of because of what the market, the condition that the market's in. For example, the stamp duty thing that the government has put into place has created a lot of activity in the market because people want to start buying houses or building their portfolio before the stamp duty comes back into place in spring. Lending conditions change very rapidly. You know how much money you can lend, what the lenders are currently working on as a loan to value, and how much they charge for lending is something else that is, you know, changes very rapidly. You need to keep an eye on your personal situation, your financial situation. You're going to be more in tune with as per your experience, but also for when we come back to purpose, I think it's very important that you sit down and you have a real think about what you want to achieve, but also why you're trying to achieve it, because that is your purpose. That is what you're trying to work towards. I see somebody's just raised their hand. Like I said at the beginning, if you have got a question, then please put it in the Q&A box. You should have a Q&A section where you can ask questions, and I'll probably get to them at the end. I might read them while we're going through the webinar, but I'll probably get to them at the end. So what happens if the property strategy that you choose isn't right? Like I said, you could very easily become demotivated, which would mean that you would make no progress. And if that happens, if you've put, you know, all your eggs in one basket, or if you're counting on something working, that can very quickly put you in financial trouble. And ultimately, it would leave you feeling like you hadn't feeling unfulfilled. And you wouldn't achieve your goals, and ultimately you would probably walk away from property. We do see people that come to us and want our help because they'd got into property maybe 10 or 15 years ago. They hadn't done a great job of it, and now they just want some help and support to make sure that they're making the right decisions. So we have a few franchisees that have been in that position, and we don't want you to do that. You know, we want you to, the first time that you come into property, when you're going at it and when you're really enthusiastic about it, that's when we want you to become successful. Now, can you make that decision on your own? Absolutely, you can. 100%. There are people out there that will make that decision and they'll do it on their own. Because they'll be able to sit down, they'll be incredibly objective about the way that they're looking at their situation, and they'll be able to objectively come up with a plan, come up with a strategy, and be able to stick to that, because they'll be incredibly self-motivated and disciplined and patient. You need quite a few skills in order to do that yourself, but is it possible? Absolutely it is. With a lot of people though, what we see is, you know, you need a guiding hand through this process. Once you've examined these questions, you're in a much more informed and educated place to make the decision and then you can get to the strategies that fit the situation and the purpose that you have. So I do have one question right now. Let me just have a look at it. That is a great question. Is it Kalu? I'm going to get to that later, but that is a great question. So one of the things that you can do, let me just go back to the previous slide. So let's assume right now what we've done is you've gone through those questions, you've gone through those situations, you've made notes, you understand exactly where you are, and you understand what you want, where you want to be. Now, for some people, you're going to think that all I'm going to talk about is sort of entry-level strategies, because entry-level strategies is where most people start out of property. However, that's not relevant. It's not relevant to everybody's situation, depending on those questions that I just asked you. So we're going to go through 7 strategies, but they're not all entry-level strategies. Now, sourcing is a really interesting one, the first one that we're going to talk about. Sourcing is something that I think most people would see as an entry-level strategy. You know, they would see it as something that, you know, you're not owning the property, you're just trading property on, and so you're not really, you know, being fulfilled by it. And you're probably not going to make a huge amount of money, because I'd say the average from our franchisees is between a £3,000 and £4,000 fee for every property that you trade on. Now, bearing that in mind, if I told you that we have a franchisee who makes around £50,000 per month from sourcing and trading deals on, you might think that that is unachievable. Or you might think that they have, that franchisee has a huge team of people that are working with him to help him achieve that. Now, admittedly, at the minute, he has increased his team by 50% because there's 3 of them. But for the majority of last year, there was only 2 of them, and they were hitting those numbers on a monthly basis. So sourcing is something that, yes, it can be an entry-level strategy, and it is a great way to get into property, to start learning about property, but it isn't just an entry-level strategy. Now, going back to the point that I made earlier about the questions that you need to ask yourself, for these guys that are doing sourcing and making a lot of money out of sourcing, it absolutely fits them as people and their purpose and their strategy and their financial conditions and their personal conditions. It fits them perfectly, and that's why they do so well out of it, which just sort of highlights why it's important to take all of those things into consideration when you're choosing your strategy. So if you're not familiar with sourcing, what you do is you find a property opportunity, you find an investor, you link them together, and that investor pays you a fee for finding that opportunity for them. We have, I'd say, about 50% of our franchisees that have, in fact, I know it's 52.3% of our franchisees are currently focusing on sourcing as their main strategy. We did a survey at the end of last year, which is why I can be so specific about the number. So we've got about half of our franchisees that are looking at this as their main strategy. And the reason this is good is because of the cash flow. Because when you're sourcing, you usually get paid upon exchange. You don't have to wait till completion. You usually get paid on exchange, which means as soon as you match that investor up with that property, you'll be paid in about 4 weeks' time. Now, the usual sourcing fee is 2% of the purchase price, which is, it's a decent amount of money when you work it out for a bigger project. However, bigger projects usually take a little bit more effort and time to get over the line. So I think focusing on doing more smaller projects, so long as the margin's there, as long as they make sense, is actually quite a clever thing to do. And our tips for sourcing are, my tip for sourcing is relevant to the £50,000 a month, and don't set yourself a ceiling. Don't think you can do 2 or 3 deals a month, because we have evidence of people that are doing this, doing it full time and doing it incredibly successfully. So now looking at rent to rent. So if you're not familiar with rent to rent, it is subletting a rental property to multiple tenants is the most usual way that you would do this. You can do a rent to rent with serviced accommodation. You can do a rent to rent with HMO is what we're talking about here. However, you can just do a normal rent to rent as a single let. It's all about the margins and understanding that the margins make sense, and that provides you with the opportunity. In most cases, it's with HMO. So you rent a normal buy-to-let property off a landlord, and then they will expect you to pay the normal single let rate to them, which you can do, and then you can rent it out as a HMO, and then you can make the margin that you've just created between the HMO rates for the rooms and the single let rate to the landlord. Now, obviously, there are contracts involved in this. There's a lot of compliance that you need to go through, not only to make sure that the landlord themselves are happy and understand what you're doing, as well as their mortgage company, but then you need to make sure that you're hitting HMO compliance as well. So there's quite a lot of things that you need to do in order to make sure that this is being done in a compliant way. However, I can say, because this is another one that I've done myself. I had 6 HMO rent to rents on the go at one point, which were making me over £1,000 per unit per month. So that's £6,000 worth of income per month in order to provide me a monthly cash flow, because I use rent to rent as a way of providing me a cash flow when I'd looked at all those questions that we've gone through earlier, and I decided that rent to rent was the perfect fit, because the predominant thing that I was looking for was cash flow. Now, I've got a very systemized and processed way of setting up rent to rents, which obviously I teach my franchisees about. And I've got the amount of time that it's taken to make money off rent to rent down to, it was actually less than a month. I started making a profit after 3 weeks of signing up a rent to rent. And that includes buying all the furniture. That includes all of that stuff. It includes the whole process. So you can start making money within a month of doing rent to rent. And where I live, the margins were absolutely fantastic, which is why I was making over £1,000 per property. But, across the country, I'd say the average amount of money that you can make per property is about £700 per month, But then you start stacking that up. If you've got 5 of those properties, that's 3.5 grand a month, which I would say in most cases covers people's cash flow. And the good thing about that is it means that if your purpose is to leave a job, but you need cash flow in order to cover your bills, if you sign up, 4 or 5, 5 rent to rents was the example that I just gave you, you know that the contract for those properties is going to last you 3 to 5 years. So that's your cash flow taken care of for 3 to 5 years. And then you come back to the bigger deals and elevating your property experience and going for those bigger deals that are going to give you bigger pots of money. And as soon as you can do that, then that generating the cash flow from rent to rent really frees you up to then escalate your property business. Our tips, my tip's going to be, you've got to make it compliant. You've got to be compliant with all of this process. There's absolutely no point in trying to skip legislation or skirt your way around the rules, because it will come back and bite you on the arse at some point. So make sure that you're doing it compliant. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't really talk about, but actually we've got a franchisee who has really made a lot of progress from doing exactly this over the last few months. And the reason that I want to talk about it is because nobody else seems to consider this as a strategy. If you look on Facebook groups, and I'm sure you've been on Facebook groups, this might be where you heard of this webinar, but if you go to Facebook, you go to Instagram, you go to all kinds of social media, what you'll see overwhelmingly is that people are out there and they feel like they've got good property deals, but they don't have the money to do them. They might not be right for bridging finance, or they might not have the deposit that they need for bridging finance, or a mortgage doesn't satisfy what they're trying to do because they just want a quick flip, and a mortgage wouldn't really isn't the right form of funding to get if you're going to go for a quick flip. So there are people out there that are very good at networking, building relationships with people, and then finding the right deal for them and matching them up. So they start with the investor. We've got a franchisee that does this. They start with the investor, they find out what the investor's requirements are, and then they go and they find the property for them. So that person, that franchisee that matches those two sides up, would get a commission paid to them as soon as the money is deployed. And on average, this franchisee earns between 5 and 10% of all the money that's deployed. So if you imagine they find an investor worth £100,000, that would be 5 to 10% of that £100,000 that they would get paid, which is a decent amount of money. Now, our biggest investment from one single investor that has been set up by a franchisee is actually 1.2 million. So straight away, you can see if you're very good at networking, if you're mixing with the right circles, and you can put these people together, and you can start to make money very quickly, and serious amounts of money just from using your skills in order to facilitate that. Tips for that are, I would say this year and over the last 12 months, this is particularly relevant, that the tips are, even when networking is not there, even when the face-to-face networking is not going on around the country because we're in lockdown, people that are very good at networking have still found a way to make this work. They've still found a way to make this happen by reaching out to the network that they have and cherry picking and expanding their network with specific targeted requests. Does anybody know an architect that I can talk to, for example? And then their existing network comes to them and say, yeah, here's an architect, or yeah, I've used this guy before. And then they can go and target architect if they're looking for, I don't know, building sites or building plots or something like that. But the point is, when all the face-to-face networking stops, that's not when these guys have stopped, because they're so focused and determined on making it work and building their network in order to make money. So building a property portfolio, and here we're going to look at HMO as well, because this might be exactly right for you. Building a property portfolio is probably going to require some amount of money, whereas the previous 3 strategies that we looked at wouldn't necessarily require a huge amount of money. This one might, because now you're talking about mortgages. You're probably talking about mortgages, and therefore you're probably talking about deposits. So this is very good for people that have got limited time. You might have a full-time job and you might be very happy in that full-time job. It might pay you very well and you've got no desire to leave that full-time job whatsoever. But you know you want to park your money, park your investments into property. Well, building a property portfolio, for example, out of using HMOs is absolutely a fantastic strategy for you to use. And you can get great returns because it's a HMO and capital growth if you find the right property. But that's what it's all about, finding the right property. And again, timescales from making money out of a HMO, if you've got a HMO that's already converted, you can start making money certainly within the first 4 weeks. So to give you an example of a property that is, it's got great returns and capital growth, I'll give you an example of a property that I sold. So this was one that I traded on a couple of years ago. And this property, it was a real tip. It was in a really bad state, but I'd seen that it was right for HMO. So I did quite a lot of research on whether, what the HMO income would be in that kind of area. And it was bought for £50,000. It was refinanced for £130,000 after the refurb, and the refurb cost the refurb cost 30 grand. It was in the north. It was turned into a HMO, and the returns from that were, I think, off the top of my head, was something like 140% return on capital employed per year. So within that first year, the person that bought that property had refinanced it, got all of their money out, and they were making a serious amount of rental income from that property. So it was a great deal for the person that I sold it to. Now, you're probably asking why I didn't do that myself. It wasn't in my chosen area. It was significantly outside of my chosen area. I didn't want to start owning property all over the place. I have a much more targeted approach than that. So if you can find something that has got that you can refinance all of your money out of, and then you're making a really good return from their HMO income, you've got a potential for infinite return, because your return on capital employed, if you've got no money left in the property, and you're still making a good amount of return, then that's an infinite return because you've got no money to compare your profit to. Our tips for this when you're building a property portfolio is, I think, to be perfectly honest with you, is to be realistic with this. This is a great strategy if you have money and you don't have a lot of time. Now, that would be, like I said, when you're focusing on exactly what's right for you, you need to take all of the factors that I talked about at the very beginning of this webinar into consideration. Because if you're happy with your job and if you have got money that you want to put into property, this could be the right strategy for you. Whereas the previous three that we've talked about would absolutely not be right for you, because they're much more time dependent. They're much more time heavy, and they need more of you in order to make them work. This is something that you can do in your spare time. We have a lot of evidence and a lot of people that we talk to who do this in their spare time. So now, taking it a step further, if you're looking at something like commercial conversions, just to give you an idea of what a commercial conversion is, it's taking a large commercial building, changing to residential, and then probably splitting into smaller units like flats. So we've got some of our franchisees that are doing exactly this at the moment with some properties. Again, looking at those criteria that you need and the questions that you need to ask yourself, this would be for somebody who probably has a bit more time than the previous example, than the previous person that's building the HMO portfolio. They're probably going to have more time because this is going to be a much more time-dependent strategy. But you would certainly need a decent-sized pot of money beside you to help you do this kind of thing. Because with commercial to residential, you're going to need to go through planning. You're going to need to have a lot of professionals involved in this to make sure that you're doing it in a compliant way and creating something that's going to be sellable at the end. Timescale, I would say, for this is 12 months. So obviously you need a pot of money, you need time, but also you need your cash flow taken care of, because you're not going to make any money out of this deal for a full 12 months. The return can be, 6 figures plus. So the return can be very significant. The return basically is limited by the building that you're converting in the first place. So the bigger the building, the more potential that you have for return. Our tips for this are, with deals like this, it's very important not to try and scrimp. Obviously, negotiate hard, negotiate deals, negotiate your prices down. However, don't think that you can get away without having an architect, without having a project manager if that's necessary, without employing a quantity surveyor. Those people are there, and they're there for a purpose, and they're there to reduce your risk, to make sure that if you're predicting you're going to make 600, 700 grand, that you are actually going to make that money at the end of the project. And then finally, the one that I want to look at is new build. Again, the things that you've got to take into consideration include experience. And if you've got experience, what should you be focusing on? If you've got experience of building plots that have got 1 or 2 houses in, what should you be focusing on? And as long as you've got a pot of money next to you, then new build might be, and going scaling that new build up instead of looking at 1s and 2s, looking at 5s to 10s or 10s to 15s. That's what you should be focusing on. So building from scratch is what I mean by new build, and the timescale for this is much longer. 12 months, I think, is probably conservative, especially if you need to go through planning, because again, that stage alone. I think I talked to a planning consultant the other day. She said that the longest planning application that she was aware of was something like 12 years. It took 12 years to get one planning application through. So planning can, significantly increase the amount of time that your projects take. But then, I don't know what that word is after 6. It should be figures, but the less said about that, the better. But you can make a significant amount of money. Obviously, you're limited by the plot size. You're limited by what you can achieve. So, the big developers can make a huge amount of money. Our tips for this, I'd say that my tip is going to be a bit surprising. That I know I've left new build last, but new build shouldn't be the top of the triangle. It shouldn't be the pinnacle that you're trying to get to. And let's go back to purpose here. If your purpose is to raise or to earn £200,000 per year, then you don't necessarily have to get to new build in order to do that. Most of the strategies that I've just shown you will give you £200,000 worth of income per year if you're consistent and if you are focused on them for long enough. We have franchisees that are making over £200,000 per year just from sourcing and trading deals on. So all of the other strategies could help you and could get you to that level. New build is more of a risk because you've got planning to consider, you've got planning to go through. So at some stage, one of the planners could make the decision where you're not allowed to do that scheme, and you could potentially have wasted quite a lot of money. Now, if you don't have that appetite for risk, and this is all about asking yourself those questions at the beginning, if you don't have that appetite for risk, then you should come back. You should come up with another strategy that you need to focus on, because that suits you, your experience, your purpose, and your personal situation to go through some of the things that we talked about earlier a lot better. So I'm going to give you one more. I think we've done 6, haven't we? So this is the last one. So looking at something that's a little bit more creative, we're going to look at assisted sales, and we're going to look at purchase splits, just to give you an idea about all of the strategies that I've talked about previously. You probably know and you probably understand. But one of the things that we find quite a lot is that most of the strategies that people already know might not make a deal create enough margin to make that deal worth doing. But as soon as you start to get a little bit more creative with it and coming up with ways to make that deal work, for instance, the 2 that I've named here, then the deal works, and all of a sudden you get the green light and you can do that deal because it's going to make you the correct amount of money. So let's look at an assisted sale. So an assisted sale is where you as an investor would come to a property, and you would see that property needed a refurbishment. So the property, let's say, might be on the market for £200,000, and after a £40,000 refurbishment, it might be worth £320,000. Now, if you were going to buy that property, you'd have stamp duty to pay, assuming it was a second property. You'd have finance costs to pay. You'd have the whole conveyancing process to fund, to go through before you were able to do that refurb, to then potentially make that profit at the back end. However, what you can do is you can work with the person that already owns the property, and you could say to that person, look, it's currently worth 200. It's going to be worth 320, but you require 40 grand's worth of investment. So how's about I put that 40 grand in, I'll manage the process where we're doing your property up. And then once the property's done up, I will pay you the 200 grand that you're asking for right now. And I won't quibble with you. I won't negotiate you down. you'll get your £200,000. I'll pay myself back the money that I've invested into the property. And if there's anything left over at the end, then that'll be my profit. But I'm taking the risk because there potentially could be nothing left at the end. That is an assisted sale. You're assisting that person at making the sale. And the way that you're assisting them is by refurbishing their property for them. Now, if you're looking at entering property because you're not already in property and you're thinking, well, you know, that sounds like a fantastic strategy. However, I can't do that because I haven't got 40 grand. Then what you could do is you could go and network with investors. You could find that 40 grand from investors and you could use an investor's money to fund that. Now, that means that you would have to share some degree of your profit with that investor, but that is a way of getting those deals done. And again, we have franchisees in our network that have done exactly that. Not used their own money, done an assisted sale and made high 5 figures by basically putting that together and managing that refurbishment for their vendor. So timescale could be anything from about 2 months. I'm not sure I understand. Let's go down there, and the return you're looking at getting into 5 figures or more for the assisted sale. To explain exactly what a purchase split is, that's when you find a property project and the purchase price, you know, there's a good amount of margin, there's a good amount of profit to be created from that project, but the purchase price is just too much. You can't borrow enough money in order to make it work. So what you could say to somebody, let's use the same numbers from the previous example. So what you could say to somebody is, I know it's worth £200,000 now, but what I'm going to propose is I'll pay you £150,000 on completion, and I'll pay you the other £50,000 when I've resold the property because I'm going to flip it. Now, what that means is you don't have to put in that £50,000, and you don't have to borrow that £50,000. Essentially, what you're doing is you're making the current vendor an investor into the property. So you can split the amount of fee that you pay that person, and you can pay them the second part of their fee at the back end, which means that they've saved you money, which has made that project work all of a sudden. So that's what we mean by a purchase split. So our tips for these strategies are, with an assisted sale, I'm going to give you a great way of identifying what an assisted sale is, or what property is appropriate for an assisted sale. And that is a property, ideally a property that's been empty for that's been on the market, for 6 months and is currently empty. That's a perfect example of an assisted sale, because if you're going to refurbish the property, you need it to be empty in order to do that work yourself. If it's been on the market for 6 months, it's probably been on the market for 6 months because it's in such a bad state. And that actually gives you great ammunition to go to the estate agent and say to the estate agent, you know, I've seen that this property's been on the market for quite a while. Now, I know that properties on that street sell really well when they're done up because people just want to move into them. So this is my proposal. And then you'd go through the proposal to the estate agent. They would go to the vendor and they would explain it to the vendor. And then if you've managed to convince the estate agent, they're going to do a much better job of convincing the vendor. Now, from our point of view, what we do is we try and help our franchisees as much as we possibly can. And we've created assisted sale brochures. And my advice to the franchisees is, when you're going to make an offer on an assisted sale, take 2 of these brochures with you. The reason that you're taking 2 is you want to give one to the estate agent, and you want to give the second one to the estate agent with the purpose of giving it to the vendor. So the vendor can go away and they can read what an assisted sale is, how it works, and how it's going to benefit them in your words, instead of through the estate agent's interpretation of how you've explained the assisted sale. Really, really powerful, really good strategies. And this is the kind of stuff that we look at, the different options that we look at to try and apply to the franchisees deals that come to us. You know, a lot of franchisees deals that come to us are absolutely fantastic, and we'll look at it and we'll think, you've identified exactly the right route to make the most money out of this property. Let's go ahead with it. But if there's a better way that we can think of, and these are 2 great ways that we've used in the past, then we'll absolutely suggest it to the franchisee as a way of making more profit out of the project. So how do we teach our franchisees about this? We have a training resource. We put on over 70 training days per year, which is comprehensive, and it covers lots of different property strategies. Let me flick through to the next slide. So you can see January, February, March, April, May, June across the top there. And these are all the courses that we're putting on throughout the year. Now, we are actually still going to run these courses because we've done a lot of research, and we can run all of these courses in a COVID compliant way. So as the regulations currently stand, we are going to be putting these courses on for a limited number of our franchisees, because that's one of the changes that we've needed to make to the course. Instead of just making them open to as many people who want to come, we need to limit the numbers to make sure that we can socially distance. But we're still putting on all of these courses for our franchisees to make sure that they know what options are available to them in looking at and assessing property projects. And this is the second half of the year. And actually, in this week since we've been back at work, I've got another 3 courses that we're going to be putting out for our franchisees. So we've got a lettings course that we're going to start doing. We've got an accountancy course, and we've got an architect's course that we're going to be putting on for the franchisees to help educate them, help inform them so they make better decisions. So these are the key factors in putting all of this together. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, you need to look at the market conditions at the moment. You need to look at the lending conditions, personal situation, financial situation, take your experience into consideration, and then look at the purpose. What are you trying to achieve? That is the killer question. I love that question. What are you trying to achieve out of property? And if you can answer all those questions, that will lead you down a path of maybe 2 or 3 different strategies that suit your situation well. And any one of those strategies might be the right choice for you, or a good choice for you. And then it's up to you to decide which one you're going to focus on. And at that point, you need to focus, and you need that self-discipline. You need that patience to understand how long you're going to do that strategy for, in order to make money. And when I first started specifically in rent to rent, this was before it was a big thing, and I got rent to rent wrong for about 6 to 12 months. For a huge period of time, I was talking to estate agents about it and just getting no's and just getting knocked back and not making any progress whatsoever. But when I finally keyed into exactly how I should talk to the estate agent, how I should structure that conversation, and how I should target my marketing, then I got the other 6 deals within the next 12 months. So 12 months can produce a great deal of results, but you need to make sure that you're patient and persistent enough to go through that period where you're making mistakes, but you're still going to come out the other end and still going to have success, and create the financial return that you're looking for. Now, with us, that's why a lot of franchisees join us, because obviously they don't have to go through that same attrition. Because in the courses, when we're talking about rent to rent, I will tell them about the mistakes that I made. I'll tell them why it wasn't working for me and how they can make sure that they avoid the mistakes that I made, and just go straight to the 12 months where they're actually getting deals and making money. So creating financial freedom, we've got 130 offices, just over 130 offices now nationwide. And that's one a great network for you to be part of if you're interested in joining the franchise, because within that network, not only have you got a huge amount of advice and experience, and just off the top of my head, we've got accountants, we've got tax advisors, we've got architects, we've got quantity surveyors, we've got RICS surveyors, we've got funders, we've got a huge amount of property builders. Who have I missed out? Have I missed out anyone? I can't think of anybody else. But you've got a huge amount of experience. And these guys, there's a couple of WhatsApp groups that we have for the franchisees. They are swapping information. They're helping each other. They're supporting each other all of the time. Now, you may have heard about our funding as well. So our funding is supplied by Source Capital, who are in the same building as us. They're part of the same business. And Source Capital can fund up to 100% of the purchase price and 100% of the refurb cost of any really high quality property project. And that's based on 70% of the GDV. So if you work out what 70% of the GDV is, and the GDV, if you're not aware, is the gross development value, so the end product. the end product that you're going to sell. If your borrowing comes in under 70% of that GDV, we can potentially lend you 100% of the purchase price and 100% of the development cost. We've got a lot of franchisees, and this is that funding is exclusive to franchisees. We raised over £10 million for our franchisees projects last year. This is just an example of somebody who's been through Source Capital and has done a project through Source Capital. Now, one of the other benefits of being a franchisee is that we supply you property leads. So you can see here that we've supplied over 35,000 property leads over the last 12 months. And those property leads cover a number of strategies. So, you know, as you could see from the 7 strategies that I gave you earlier on, they come from very different kinds of properties, you know, commercial conversions, new builds. Sourcing can be anything. HMOs are going to be predominantly just normal residential houses. We provide our franchisees with a huge amount of property leads every single month for them to have a look at, assess, and if they're good, they can send them to us and they can ask to pursue that project, to either buy it themselves or go through Source Capital to get the funding for it. Whatever that might be, we will then, once they've assessed it and they know that it's good, we can then take it forward with them and show them how they can make as much money as they possibly can on that project. We also have an investor list of over 100,000 registered investors. And these investors are from all over the world. So if you wanted to focus on sourcing because your purpose is to make cash flow from your property or from your property business, then we can hook you up with investors. And the guys that make £50,000 per month from selling and trading deals, I'd say the majority of their investors come from this list, who are, you know, this investor list is engaged, it's hungry. They're always looking for new deals, and we sell deals every single month to people that have come from this list. These are all the training courses that we currently offer. And what we would do is we would say to you, if you came on board, that you would need to do the induction, sourcing, and deal packaging training. That is a mandatory requirement. But then after that, you can come on any of the courses that you want to, and you don't have to. You don't just need to come onto the course once. You can come onto any of the courses as many times as you want to. The education here is runs all of the time, and you can jump in and jump out as frequently as you want to. So we hold bi-monthly support days as well. So every second month, we get together with a small group of franchisees and we hold support days. And these are basically in the mastermind format. So each franchisee takes it in turn to stand at the front of the room and talk about their business. What challenges have they faced? What have they done well? What have they seen great results for? And all the other franchisees in the room learn. And if they have had challenges, all the other franchisees in the room get to offer solutions and come up with ways that they can mitigate the challenges that they've had. Really, really great way of helping each other build businesses, and also creating that great community feel that helps people, because a lot of people in property work from home on their own. So having these support days helps them feel part of a community and part of a group of people striving towards similar goals. We also have the monthly trading events like we've just had a look at, and we've got a dedicated account manager. So each franchisee that comes on board now, they have a support person, and that support person will look after a maximum of 30 franchisees. And that support person, their full-time job is to make sure that those 30 franchisees are as successful as they possibly can be. So they'll assess deals, they'll help them process deals, they'll help them get deals through funding, they'll do whatever it takes in order to help franchisees get to that end point where they're making money out of property. We've got unlimited deal reviews, so you can send us as many deals as you want to. We'll happily look at them and suggest ways that you can make money out of them. We've got one-to-one calls, as many one-to-one calls as you require, because your support person is there specifically for you all of the time. And then we've got one-to-one visits as and when they're allowed. Now, the running costs for the franchise. Obviously, you become part of a big national brand. You've got an exclusive area of 40,000 households. You've got the training and access to all of the other training after your induction. You've got a proven business model where there's plenty of people that are in and around the country that are making a huge amount of money from our help and advice on building their property business. And then you've got exposure on our property website. So if you want to sell deals, we can put it on our website, and that comes at no additional cost. The cost of joining is £12,500 plus VAT. We have a monthly license fee, and that license fee pays for your property leads. It pays for your investor leads. It pays for your ongoing support from your support person. You've got national brand marketing that you can take advantage of with things like the assisted sale brochure that I mentioned earlier. And then you've got the support days, access to peer-to-peer finance. So like I said earlier, the finance that we can go up to 100% of the purchase price and 100% of the build costs is only available to franchisees. Then you've got the monthly training events. You've got sourced investor network management. So we can create networking events for you. We can help you host networking events if that's what you want to do, if networking is part of your strategy. And then we have a huge amount of not only legal documents, but documents and guides and brochures and just a huge amount of data and information that you can use, you can tap into whenever you need to. So if you were going to go this alone, how much would that cost you? Now, if you look on the open market, investor leads cost you about £15 per investor lead. That's obviously, now working on the number of investor leads the average franchisee gets, that would normally cost them about 450 quid per month. With us, that's obviously included in your license fee. If you're looking at the property leads that we send to franchisees, that would normally cost you about £50 per property lead. And again, with us, that's included in your license fee. So if you're going to go this alone, the number of leads, the number of investor leads and property leads that we supply for you would normally cost just under £2,000 a month. And with us, we charge you £200 per month in order to supply all of that information. And we work on the basis that we make money when you start making money. Now, I've got two examples now of franchisees who, these have been their first deals, the first deals that they've done in property. And I wanted to show them to you because they're very, very different. And it goes back to exactly what we were talking about. With both of these franchisees, you take into consideration all of the questions that I've asked and their purpose, their financial situation, their personal situation, the market data, and the lending data, and you look at what is the right strategy for them. So this is an example of our franchisee in Bournemouth, Chris, and he's converted that commercial building. It's actually quite a big building. It goes back for quite a long way. He's converted that commercial building into 14 apartments. So what he's going to do with that is he's going to create it into 14 apartments. He's going to up the GDV from £875,000 to 2.2 million. And so his profit's going to be significant around that project. Now, that was his first ever property deal, but it suited him and his situation really well. Everton joined Sourced, and he was a recruitment consultant before he joined Sourced. And his first deal was a serviced accommodation deal. So it was a rent-to-rent serviced accommodation deal. He took on a flat. He thought it was really good for serviced accommodation and started renting it out. And that flat generated a profit of something in and around the reason. And with service accommodation, it can fluctuate, but it was about £800 per calendar month. Now, look at those two deals. Look at those first deals, and then think about the way that other people are marketing and hyping up what you should be doing right now in property. They're giving you instruction about what course they want you to buy off them, rather than what actually suits you. It's very relevant from the data and the advice or the evidence that I've given you, that what you should be doing is considering your situation and coming up with a more bespoke plan that actually fits your situation. And that's exactly what we do, because every single franchisee that comes on, as soon as they've gone through induction, the next week they have to have a meeting with their support person and come up with a plan straight away to create a path that's going to lead them through property. So, you might think that joining Source is a good idea. You might not. Whichever decision you make, I'm absolutely comfortable with, but I really would like you to take more into consideration than just listening to other people tell you what course or what strategy they want you to do for their benefit, not for your benefit. You need to take a lot more stuff into consideration when you're making these big decisions. So that's the end of the presentation. I really appreciate spending the evening with me. I have absolutely no idea what time it is or how long I've taken up your time for. It's almost exactly an hour. Would you believe it? But I do have 2 questions, so I'm going to hop into those questions, and I'm going to answer those questions now. First question: is it possible to have a copy of these slides? You will be given a copy of the recording because I've recorded this for you. So in the next couple of days, one of our marketing team will send you an email and they'll give you a copy of this recording. So look out for that. Second question from Kalu: is it possible to start off as a property sourcer, then grow into an investor on a part-time basis? Absolutely. That's a great question, because when you're plotting your path through property, if you're starting out with sourcing because it's right now, you need to bear in mind that in 2 years' time, sourcing isn't going to be right for you anymore, because at that point, you'll have built up a pot of money. You'll have sourcing sort of streamlined so that it's working and it's not taking your full-time, like the equivalent of a full-time job like it was 2 years ago, but it's still providing you with a good source of income because you've made your investor list much more efficient. You've made the way that you're finding properties much more efficient. And so in 2 years' time, it might be relevant for you to move on to flips and refurbs or even potentially commercial conversions. So absolutely, you should look to plot your path through property as moving from one strategy to the next as your needs change. Now, like I said, you could go through your entire path could be with sourcing all the way, because that might suit you down to the ground like it does for a couple of our franchisees. That isn't the case for most people, though. Most people would like to move on to different strategies where they're actually, going into commercial conversions or going into new builds. But that depends on exactly what your purpose is at that time. And whereas when you're plotting your path today on day one, you should take that into consideration. You shouldn't use that as a goal. Your goal should be something like something that's less inflexible. So your goal should be about the money that you want to create or the money that you want to earn. And as the saying goes, your goals should be resolute, but your path to your goals should be flexible. So in 2 years' time, when you get to that point where you're going to change from one strategy to the next, previously you might have thought you'd do a commercial conversion, whereas now you think you're going to do your flips and refurbs because you're getting a lot of leads in that are flips and refurbs, and you can get to that £200,000 mark using that strategy. And you're much more interested in that strategy now than you were with commercial conversions. So that's a great question. You absolutely should plot your path using different strategies. How do you begin a career in sourcing for investors as a stream of additional income? So good question, Jason. You network with investors. You think about where investors are, and you go and talk to them, and you find out what they're looking for, because there are a lot of sources out there. It doesn't take much to get into sourcing, and there are a lot of sources out there that are not very good at what they do. So if you can get to know your investor on a much better level than most sources do, you're going to be able to fulfill their needs. And really, when you're talking to your investors, that same question that I absolutely love should be one of the first questions that you're asking your investor. What are you trying to achieve? What are you looking to achieve out of property? And how can I help you do that? And then you would listen to them. You'd probably have a couple of meetings with them, and then you'd go out there and you'd try and fulfill what they're actually looking for. So that's how you start talking to investors. And you know what, Jason? I almost guarantee that you will already have investors in your network. You will know somebody, you will know people already that are investing in property. And making sure that you have conversations with those people about what you're trying to do is a great place to start. Because if they're already in your network, you've already built up credibility with them. And therefore, in most cases, your first sale will come from somebody connected to your existing network. And that's why, to give you the example of what I did, that's why I had 2 conversations every single day about property, because I wanted my existing network to know that I was in property, because I truly believed that the first stuff that I was going to do in property, the first steps forward that I was going to make, would come from my existing network. Next question from James: is it possible to reach out to any franchisees to get their perspective
on how they've done with sourced. Yeah, absolutely, James. I think the best thing for you to do is to, I'll tell you what, I'll take your name down, James. I'll give your name to our franchise manager, Sam, and Sam can put you together with some franchisees. I'll certainly give you a list of franchisees that you can talk to. How do you go about getting professional indemnity insurance and money laundering license? So PI insurance, it depends on what you're doing, Kalu. It depends on what you're doing and what you're going to focus on. Because with sourced, you don't have to do everything. So you might not want to do any property sourcing because it might not fulfill you. And therefore, you don't need to add property sourcing to the list of insurances that you're going to take out because you're not going to be taking, you're not going to be following that business path. So with the professional indemnity insurance, it would be tailored to exactly what you want to focus on. With the money laundering license, well, you'd have to do that in the normal way. So you'd go through HMRC because you would be registered as an estate agent, because that's the closest description to what we do for the AML license. So you would go through HMRC as an estate agent for your AML license in the normal way. And with that, there are currently no other questions. Let me just check the other box at the top. Yeah, there's no other questions. So I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much for being here. The recording will be sent out to you in the next couple of days. And James, I will pass your details on to Sam. So much appreciated. I hope you've got some value in this. But please make sure that you take a look at those questions that you should be asking yourself when you decide to focus on a property strategy for the next 12 months. And hopefully I will speak to you soon. Thanks very much.